Hey everybody, welcome back to Mind Keys. So in today's video, I wanted to continue along this brand new series that I just started with a recent video, which is resources for beginners. So that's what today's video is going to be about. So if you're someone who is maybe researching psychedelics, never done them before, curious about them, wanting to learn more before you dive in, this video would be for you. If you're somebody who is only microdosed and you're considering doing a macrodose and you want to learn more about psychedelics and you're just kind of excited, this would be for you as well. Or if you're someone who maybe is just kind of new, you've just recently macrodosed a few times, you're still relatively new to this whole kind of field of psychedelics and exploring it, you want to learn more about it, this is also for you. And with all that being said, there are probably a few seasoned psychonauts who may not know this information yet, who may also benefit from it. So if that's you, or if you're just curious, watch on. So the topic for today's video is going to be something that I feel is really important to discuss and kind of clarify a bit. And really none of this is my own, although I agree with all of it, none of this is my own content. This is really just drawn from Rick Doblin and what he said from various interviews and various pieces of media that I've taken in from him and other kind of luminaries in psychedelic therapy space. So I'm really just kind of echoing and parroting and passing the message on along to you, offering my own kind of twist, my own insight from my own experiences with these substances to offer to you to help you clarify which one may be a good fit for whatever it is you might be dealing with. So let me just clarify really quick when I say this, that I'm not necessarily advocating psychedelics for everybody. I'm not, recommending them per se. I'm not prescribing them per se. Psychedelics are not right for everybody. I want to be really clear about that because it can be really easy to see all the good news, gloss over the horror stories, be a little glib about it, and just kind of overly endorse them or overly recommend them to people. And I don't want to do that. So I want to be responsible here and say that I'm not, in any way advocating that you take them. I'm merely suggesting that if you're considering taking them for some sort of a mental health issue or some sort of self-healing purpose, this is probably some useful information for you in terms of which might be the right one for you. So that's really my intention here. It's just harm reduction. It's just guidance. It's just pointing you in the right direction so that you find the right medicine if you're determined to take psychedelics in the first place. If you're not, then, there are obviously all kinds of other modalities and other things that you can do separately from psychedelics, outside of psychedelics, if you're not sure if they're right for you or if they're safe for you, or, in combination with some psychedelics, if you are someone who is considering using them, but, doesn't want to just kind of, disregard all the others. So, okay, caveats out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about the content for today. Oh, and by the way, really quick, in case I haven't made it explicitly clear to you, or in case you're a new viewer and this is your first time seeing my videos and this channel, I just recently completed creating a mini course just for you, for anyone who might be struggling with feeling triggered, with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD issues, with dissociation, with anything like that, where you're out of sorts, you're dysregulated, you're confused, you're overwhelmed, you're upset, you're emotional, you're out of balance, any of that. I created a course of the most recent, most potent techniques, 10 of the most potent techniques that you can learn to start to self-regulate, come back to center, let go of the triggers, start to heal your anxiety, start to transform your social anxiety or your general anxiety or your depression or your PTSD by helping your brain come back to center, helping your nervous system release the tension and stress right away. These tools work. They're powerful. I give them to every single one of my clients. And you get this course and it's short and it's effective and it's easy to follow for really cheap. So go check it out. Link down below. It's called the Self-Regulation Mini Course. It is how to heal your anxiety, your PTSD, your depression. It is the tools. So check it out. You'll thank me for it. I promise you. Okay, on to the content. Let's get it. Okay, so finally, so the question is, that I want to really answer in this video. The question is, if you're going to take a psychedelic to self-treat, You want to rewire your brain. You want to get over anxiety. You want to get over depression. You want to start to heal some serious PTSD you're struggling with, or, just kind of refresh. Maybe you see, the science is awesome and amazing and very inspiring and very optimistic and hopeful. Maybe you've read a bunch of anecdotes online, on forums, on Facebook, on Reddit, wherever, where you're seeing people discuss how microdosing or macrodosing has really been a game changer for them. And you want to self-heal, right? What's going to be the right psychedelic to take for you? This is a really important question to consider because they have different mechanisms of action. The family of psychedelics is kind of broad, and there's quite a few that work in very different ways and feel different ways, have different characters to them. And even some of the more classic psychedelics, like say psilocybin and LSD, can be significantly different in character enough that it's worth talking about and considering what's what for different applications. So let's go ahead and unpack that a bit. So let's say, as an example, you are wanting to get over anxiety. You're struggling with anxiety, whether that's general anxiety, whether that's some specific form of anxiety like social anxiety or performance anxiety, something like that. You have an anxiety issue you want to deal with. You're looking at psychedelics to help you rewire your brain, clear, get to the root of whatever it is, help you clear it and get over it. What is going to be the right psychedelic for that? For that, I would say one to consider that most people wouldn't think is MDMA. And again, this is going off of what Rick Doblin has said, and also what I've seen other, people like James Fadiman, for example, mention, and other luminaries in the space. MDMA is great in that it calms the amygdala. It calms the fear center in the brain. So, and by MDMA, I mean what's commonly known as Molly or ecstasy. MDMA is incredibly effective at putting you in a state where you are able to consider and process frightening information, upsetting information that normally you want to kind of like ignore and tune out and you're too afraid to look at. It's very powerful for helping you to feel safe in your own skin, to feel relaxed, to feel confident, to feel like everything is so good, like your cup is so full of well-being that it's comfortable to then consider and look at what might be upsetting to you. So for something that might be, a root to anxiety, some sort of deep fear that you might be carrying, for example, MDMA might be an excellent tool to help you resolve that because it really calms the amygdala, the fear center in the brain, and helps you to really just kind of look at things a bit more with a bit more distance, a bit more detachment. So that would be the first one. The second one for anxiety that you might consider as well might be psilocybin. Now I need to kind of caveat this a little bit here because psilocybin, while less stimulating than say LSD or DMT, for example, still can be very stimulating. It's unlike MDMA, much more possible to feel fear with psilocybin, but psilocybin still, lights up your serotonin system. So there's still a joyful component to it a lot of the time. And psilocybin has the ability to also help you kind of reevaluate and reflect on and reframe your experience from different points of view. It also helps you to really kind of access the unconscious more and then unpack what might be inside of you. And, for a lot of people who aren't familiar with doing any sort of kind of therapeutic work, I think there's kind of a common misconception that the unconscious mind is this kind of repository of all our deepest, darkest, shadowy fears and, our anger and our repressed, desires and frustrations and this kind of stuff that we don't want to confront, which is sometimes true. But more often than not, the unconscious is filled with wisdom and insight or, positive feelings that we've been repressing as well, beauty and love and compassion or, just really intelligent aspects of ourselves that we may not be listening to or maybe filtering out. Now, with psilocybin, my experience has been that often these substances are excellent at helping us to access these other aspects of ourselves and gain new wisdom and new insight around old problems. So for anxiety, sometimes that can be useful. The downside is that when it comes to the classic psychedelics, and by classic psychedelics, I mean LSD, psilocybin, DMT. So when it comes to the classic psychedelics, there is certainly some anxiety that can come when we're coming up. So when you're coming onto the psychedelic, there's a sense of anticipation and a sense of the body recognizing that something's shifting and the pattern is kind of altering in the body, as is the case whenever we take, any drug. You start to have a drink and your body starts to recognize, and there's that moment of you're not drunk, but you're not sober anymore, and your body's kind of making that shift. Same with most supplements we take. So this is true across the board, and it's no different with psychedelics. But with that moment of recognition of kind of the pattern shifting in the body, there can be a little bit of a sense of anxiety that comes with that for a lot of people. So given that that's the case, psilocybin, may not be great because it can kind of exacerbate anxiety if you're really, really anxious and really, really sensitive to that. It can also be the case that if you're microdosing psilocybin, that also can kind of build up a sense of anxiety for some people. I would say that the other side of this coin is that, for anyone who's kind of a more seasoned psychonaut, has been using them for a long time, as is the case with me, a lot of us are used to this kind of come up anxiety and kind of the fear it brings up. And we actually use it, and you can use it as a form of exposure therapy. So if you know that you're going to take a psychedelic and you know that you're going to feel anxious, maybe for that first hour as your nervous system kind of gets used to the drug kind of moving through your system and getting used to that. And then you know that at some point you'll probably, and this is something you should know, kind of plateau over into a more relaxed, comfortable state of being. If you know that that's what's going to happen ahead of time, then you can kind of anticipate that when that anxiety comes, you can kind of work with it and use it as a way to kind of explore your relationship to fear and explore your relationship to anxiety. So this is one of the ways that the anxiety that psilocybin generates can also be used as a positive rather than a negative. It can help you kind of really just kind of somatically breathe into it and feel the fear in your body and relate to it and explore it and really kind of, inquire into what is the root of this fear? Where is this fear coming from? What am I afraid of happening? These kinds of things. These are all very common things that psychonauts do when coming up on psilocybin. So I hope that gives a little food for thought. It can be really useful. The afterglow from psilocybin is great for anxiety. You'll tend to feel really awesome the next day, or even, an hour or two after the trip is over. And it can be really helpful just in terms of connecting you to joy, quite frankly. It's very common for people to experience a lot of happiness and a lot of bliss and a lot of pleasure and a lot of, excitement when they're on psilocybin. So if you access that state, that can really help to kind of counteract some of the anxiety you may have been dealing with. I know for myself, one last thing I'll say about it, and then we'll move on. For me, psilocybin has also been great in terms of sometimes I'll have a fear, something I'm ruminating on, worrying about, stressing over. Then I'll take psilocybin. And once I've really come onto it, a very common thing for me is to then look at that problem or think about that problem and really get the very clear message from deep within my being that I'm worrying about nothing, or that I'm over worrying about it, or that I'm blowing something out of proportion. I shouldn't stress so hard. I should relax. I should lighten up. I should learn to laugh and love and live more. These are all very common themes on psychedelics in general. And so psilocybin can be useful in that sense as well. But again, I do want to caveat that for some people, it can make anxiety worse, especially if you don't have any sort of, self-regulation tools, like I mentioned in this video, or any supplements, any kind of anxiolytic, kind of calming anxiety type supplements that you might want to piggyback along with psilocybin. Okay, so that covers anxiety. What about depression? So I'm sure if you're depressed and you're interested in psychedelics, you probably have already done a bunch of research. You've already heard what I'm going to list here. So none of this is going to be news to you, but I'm going to say it anyways because I want to make this resource for anyone who's a beginner. So maybe this is the first video you've seen on. So here are the psychedelics that tend to be more useful for depression. I think first of all, let's start with this, the biggest gun here, and that would be ayahuasca. Now, I have limited experience with ayahuasca. I'm not one of these people who's done, a couple hundred experiences in Peru with shamans, but I do have experience with it. And because it has the MAO inhibitor part of ayahuasca, the vine part of ayahuasca, along with the DMT that is, longer lasting, it's shown to be very effective and in terms of an antidepressant. Now, with that being said, obviously do your research when it comes to, MAOIs and any meds you might be taking. It can be very dangerous to take ayahuasca with SSRIs, for example, or other meds. So do your research before you take ayahuasca with anything that you might already be taking for depression. It can kill you. It's not common, but it does happen. So please be careful. That being said, if you're just doing ayahuasca, if you've tapered off all your meds, you're safely doing ayahuasca, it can help. There's a lot of studies that show that it can be very effective in terms of being an antidepressant. And I know a lot of people who have really transformed their lives from taking ayahuasca. So it's super valid. It definitely has its place. And it's very intense, very powerful, very therapeutic. And although there are moments of goodness within it, I would not say overall that it's an easy or pleasant thing to experience. So you have been warned. Okay, other things for depression. LSD. So for whatever reason, in our current social climate here in 2021, when it comes to the dialogue about therapeutic use of psychedelics, most of the conversation right now is centered around psilocybin. And I think that's because people like the idea of its naturalness. I think that's because it's being studied alongside MDMA by MAPS and, being looked at in terms of these clinical trials. So LSD still kind of gets maligned a little bit, or kind of cast with its old shadow from the 60s as this really dangerous, more edgy, more, like a really risky psychedelic. My experience has been that that's not necessarily the case. So I'll be frank, I've done plenty of LSD in my life, quite a bit. And my experience with it has been that, generally speaking, it's been pretty reliable and pretty safe. Now, in terms of depression, the reason why it might be useful for you is that LSD has more of a dopaminergic profile to it than psilocybin. So both of them work on the serotonin system. So both of them are going to stimulate the 5-HT2A receptors in your heart. They connect to these receptors, and instead of an SSRI where it's going to kind of down-regulate these receptors because you're basically telling your body that you already have the serotonin flowing through your system, so it doesn't need to have all the openings there to catch more serotonin, which is essentially what these receptors do. Instead of that, what it does is actually it fits in the receptor sites like perfectly, like a key to a lock. It fits in, so it's an agonist instead of an antagonist, I believe. So it stimulates. And so what that does over time is wake up your serotonin system and help you to generate more serotonin and have a more sensitive, more alive, more robust serotonin system, as far as I understand it. Now, LSD, like I said, also has this dopamine aspect to it. It also stimulates the dopamine system. So people find LSD often to be more motivating, more energizing. Sometimes mushrooms and psilocybin can be a little kind of sleepy and fuzzy and hazy and kind of groggy feeling. LSD has less of that. It's much more crisp. It's much more kind of sharp and vivid. It's much more close to like a cup of coffee or stimulating. I wouldn't say it's like an amphetamine necessarily, but it definitely gives you a much more energized, bubbly, kind of experience. And so for somebody who, is maybe low motivation, along with the low affect of depression, and is really struggling to have energy, to feel alive, to feel motivated, LSD might be more useful for you than psilocybin. They're both going to, again, stimulate that serotonin system, but LSD offers that nice piece of dopamine as well, which can be really, really useful if you're struggling with energy motivation. The other thing I would say about depression is a couple more things here. One, in terms of psilocybin, how does that work with depression? I would say personally, psilocybin works really well. You'll see a lot of success stories online of people who have started macrodosing with psilocybin, and it really helped them resolve a lot of stuff, really helped them transform their depression. It can be very effective. It is legitimate as a tool for depression. That being said, because of that less dopaminergic piece, it may be, it may or may not be the right thing for you. My experience, kind of anecdotally, what I've noticed with all the people I know, because I've been involved in psychedelic community for decades now, is that some people really tend to gravitate towards either LSD or psilocybin. There are a lot of people obviously that like both, but it's funny how some people, psilocybin really agrees with them more and LSD doesn't, and they'll find that LSD is too much or too agitating or too upsetting or fake feeling. Some of that is just kind of the unconscious kind of bias of a synthetic versus an organic. That's a conversation for another time. LSD isn't as synthetic as it might seem, but I do think that dopaminergic aspect makes a difference. And then also some people are the other way around. LSD really agrees with them. Mushrooms can be a little kind of overwhelming, weird, kind of high and low and fuzzy and woozy and all over the place. So you really just got to kind of explore what works for you. But in general, they're both going to have that serotonin aspect. They're both going to give you a nice afterglow the day after. They're both going to kind of help you process stuff and bring up things that need addressing or looking at or, feeling or connecting to. They're both awesome in that regard. So they're more similar than they are different, but those are kind of the nuances between the two. So the last thing I want to say about depression is ketamine, which is, obviously already something that's legal for depression, something that's out there, already been done by a lot of people. There are high profile people who have done it. You may have done it yourself, or you may know someone who has. I would say, here's my one caveat. If you are brand new, you're looking at ketamine for depression, obviously go to a doctor, go to a center, do it properly. Getting ketamine and doing it recreationally or, self-treating with ketamine for depression, I haven't seen that many success stories of online, to be honest. And I know a lot of people who have had problems with ketamine, whether it's kind of a psychological addiction to it, whether it's just kind of the weirdness and the messiness of it. Ketamine, being a dissociative as well as a psychedelic, is a very strange bird. It's a very weird drug. And while it can be fun in low doses, low to moderate doses, and can be relatively safe in low to moderate doses, if you're brand new to psychedelics, I don't think it's a great beginner one. And I don't think if you're trying to self-treat for depression, that's really your best course of action. So some of you might be wondering also, what about MDMA for depression? I would say it's a mixed bag. Anecdotally, I don't see it being recommended for depression a lot. Although if there's trauma at the root of your depression, it would be useful for the trauma work. My own experience with MDMA has been largely positive. I've probably done maybe 100 MDMA journeys over the course of my life, something like that. And I really like it. But I think that my experience, follows a lot of people's, which is that the come down, the Tuesday blues afterwards can be pretty rough. So if you're doing it for depression, it may kind of help you get out of the box of your depression for the duration of the MDMA. You might really look at some stuff and move through some stuff and really heal some stuff. But the price you're going to pay for that is that it might send you worse into depression for the next couple of days afterwards. So I don't know if that's worth it. Just side note, if you happen to be a psychedelic therapist watching this and differently, please feel free to comment below. I would love to update my knowledge around this, but this is kind of what I've seen, what I've experienced, what I know. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend MDMA for depression. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about PTSD. So this has been, an interesting topic for a lot of different reasons. One, we have a lot of people who are dealing with PTSD, whether it's from, war veterans, people who are domestic abuse survivors, people who, are narcissistic abuse survivors, stuff like this. And we're also starting to recognize as a culture that there's a phenomenon of what's called childhood PTSD or complex PTSD that a lot of people carry. So it seems that perhaps PTSD may be much more pervasive of an issue in our society, much more common than we realize. Some of that sure may be self-diagnosis and may not be accurate and may not be, something that a licensed professional would agree with. But it seems that there are a lot of people out there who feel like they are easy to be triggered, easy to dissociate, easy to find themselves in fight or flight, easy to find themselves in some sort of a state where they're dysregulated regularly. And so for whether it's robust kind of, acute PTSD or complex PTSD, what's going to be the best psychedelic to kind of address this? Well, the obvious like main tool that they're using psychedelic therapy right now is MDMA once again. So you're noticing a theme here. Anytime that you have something that's based around fear, which, PTSD is basically your amygdala has stored some sort of traumatic event and has really deeply integrated and, recalled and record that information. And so that's a fear imprint deep in the kind of mechanics of the amygdala in your brain. So MDMA calms the amygdala. It relaxes the fear center of the brain, basically. So I know I said that before, kind of reiterating here. So for PTSD, this is going to be very, very, very useful for you. So if you have sort of deep imprint that you need to let go of, MDMA would be my first choice. If I was in that situation, I had PTSD really bad and I wanted to get over it, I would find an MDMA therapist and I would do MDMA therapy. That's what I would do. If you're going to self-treat, it would help to have some sort of self-inquiry tools, some sort of maybe co-counseling with someone else who can kind of hold space with you, who can trip sit with you, who can protect you and make sure you're safe and make sure that you feel safe around them. And that might be able to help you kind of guide your attention and ask you the right questions. One of the things I've noticed with MDMA in particular is that it can tend to cause us to have very kind of drifty, low quality attention. We can be very distracted. I kind of consider, I call it goldfish brain, where your attention span is shorter than goldfish and you just really can't focus on anything for very long. So if you're trying to focus on a traumatic event or a deep piece of emotion that you want to really kind of work on for PTSD, and you're doing this with self-addressing, do know that you may need help continuing to put your attention on the right place in order to inquire into that piece. So if you're doing self-healing with MDMA, that's something you should know. But first protocol in terms of what's going to really, really work, MDMA is a great place to start. Next place I would go from MDMA would probably be psilocybin, but again, we run into similar issues that we did with anxiety, where the psilocybin can also kind of trigger a little bit of a fight or flight response, or a little bit of more of an anxiety response, which could end up making the PTSD worse. So if you're self-treating your PTSD with psychedelics, please do be very careful, because the way I would describe it, this would not be official, this would not be professionally what they say but just anecdotally, the way I think of it is that it's a bit more excitatory and it tends to wake up the animal, a part of our nervous system. So a lot of people find that they're agitated, a lot of people find that they're a little nervous or a little upset, or they just have a lot of energy in the body. This is one thing people don't realize about psychedelics, is they give you a lot of energy. They give you a lot of, like, you want to move, you want to walk, you want to fidget, you can't sit still. Sometimes that energy can be so much, especially if there's trauma kind of buried in our nervous system that it's kind of bringing up. It can bring up like kind of hot-headedness or an angstiness, or like a feeling like we're just kind of upset, right? So if that's the case, then I would not recommend. If you're someone who knows that that's what psilocybin does for you, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're able to work with that, so if you're able to self-regulate enough through these kinds of angsty feelings, then it can be really fruitful. So for PTSD, it really just depends on how good you are at self-regulating and what happens once that kind of animal nervous system, fight or flight system gets a little more stimulated. I wouldn't say it's dramatic, not something as dramatic as, say, taking a stimulant might be, but it's still something that's a component, that's a piece there that you should know. So I hope that helps. I hope this makes sense. So just in summary here, for anxiety, I would say, first thing you should look at is MDMA, but psilocybin may also work well. For depression, I would look at ayahuasca or LSD first. Mushrooms can also work. Ketamine therapy can also work as well, but I would not self-administer ketamine for depression at home. Just my own personal point of view. And then for PTSD, again, you're best off with MDMA, but psilocybin or LSD can also work as long as you're able to navigate and self-regulate through any kind of angsty, kind of energetic, kind of upset like moments or spots that may happen. So I hope this helps. I hope this makes sense. Hopefully, if you are considering doing some sort of work like this on yourself, you have some, at very least, a trip sitter. If you're a beginner, this is kind of a must. If you are, maybe a little more experienced and you just want a friend to kind of be there and be present with you, I think that's a very good idea. I think it's a good idea to have some sort of self-regulation tools, which is why I made the course that I made. Again, link down below. Or you know a little bit about psychology, maybe a little bit about meditation and self-inquiry. All of these are tools that are going to serve you very well if you're looking to heal yourself and you're looking at psychedelics as the option of how you want to go about doing that. So anyways, I hope this helps you. Big love, big respect to you all. Take care. Thanks for watching. Until next time.